Sunday morning, and I've just watched Golovkin versus Wade. I haven't watched Roman Gonzalez yet. I will try and do that before the call-in show, which will be tomorrow night. But yeah, my prediction streak continues to 5 in a row, although I cannot take too much credit for picking Gennady Golovkin by early knockout. Essentially, it's an overused cliche in the sport. Boxing is a sport of levels, and the levels were really available for all to see in this particular fight. Dominic Wade, he showed a bit of heart. He got up, I think he was knocked down 3 times in total. He got up the first 2 times. Both occasions he was clearly badly hurt. The second time the fight could definitely have been stopped, but he showed a lot of heart, a lot of determination to get up, but fundamentally he was just terribly outmatched. You looked at him, Dominic Wade was a guy, he liked to sort of fight with an orthodox jab and then try and build into scrapping in the pocket, and that seemed to be his game plan, was use his superior size, maybe use his superior weight to try and jab his way in and then rough Golovkin up in the pocket. And there were 1 or 2 occasions where he was able to land on Golovkin. There was a nice combination he actually landed in the second. But realistically, you could see even from Wade's best work that he wasn't in the same calibre as Golovkin. For me, a clear example was the jab. You saw Wade pushing a jab out, glancing off Golovkin, and you saw Golovkin's jab, and the difference in speed, the difference in precision, the difference in power between the two was immediately obvious, even from what's in the fight on an iPad. Golovkin seemed to have the ability to hurt Dominic Wade at will, and as someone who hadn't fought at this level before, Dominic Wade simply didn't have the defence, he didn't have the lateral movement, and he didn't have the punch resistance to live with a guy like Golovkin. He was there to be hit. I think if you're fighting against Golovkin, you can't stand straight in front of him and duke it out with him, and that essentially seemed to be Dominic Wade's tactic, which was bizarre. I guess he had to look at trying to find an area he had some way of having an advantage of Golovkin in, and clearly that was size. He was a much bigger man than Golovkin. I think he was 176 pound or something at the 30-day check weight, so he was probably a stone heavier than Golovkin, or not a stone, but maybe 10 pounds heavier than Golovkin. And I guess that was his game plan, was to try and use his size, but realistically it played completely into Golovkin's hands. He was there to be hit. There was no movement, there was no jab to keep Golovkin off, and Golovkin beat him in every way. Beat him behind the jab, beat him on the outside, beat him on the inside, roughed him up, had the power to hurt him, and to be honest, I was surprised the fight went as long as it did, which is the last minute of the second round. Credit to Golovkin, it was his mandatory defence. He clearly is a very, very, very good fighter, Golovkin. He's clearly the number 1 middleweight in the world by some margin at this point, and he's a real handful. I've got to give Golovkin all sorts of credit. Having said that, this isn't the kind of fight I like to see. This isn't a fight that I was excited for. This isn't a fight that I wanted to stay up to watch. And I think that's replicated by a number of the fans here. I look at my YouTube channel, which I know is a very small minnow of a YouTube channel in the scale of things, but there's very few people on it talking about Golovkin. There are very few hits on my video doing a prediction for Golovkin Wade. I guess when you've got a fighter like Wade who's unknown, and when the fight is deemed to be so uncompetitive, it's just really hard to get excited for it. So, fair play to Golovkin, taking care of his mandatory, but it's just not the calibre of fight that us fans, I guess, want to see. And Dominic Wade, who probably is a fine fighter, maybe, I know he's an American, but let's say maybe he's a British level fighter, that sort of domestic level, just didn't really merit being in the same ring as Golovkin. Split decision win over Sam Solomon that many thought Solomon won probably showed his level, and against Golovkin he was hopelessly outmatched in every area. People are talking about Golovkin moving up to 168. That's something I'm going to discuss in this week's live show and the podcast. We're going to do the live show on Monday and the podcast on Wednesday at 9 o'clock on both days, so check in to see those. But I'm concerned about Golovkin at 168. This Dominic Wade, I thought looked almost the weight class above Golovkin, and this was at 160. If you stuck Golovkin next to a Fight Night George Groves, the size difference would be huge. You know, people have weight classes for a reason. And I think whilst Golovkin is a superb middleweight, he is just that, a superb middleweight. And, you know, I saw a thread on my Facebook this week, which was, does Gennady Golovkin hit harder than most heavyweights? And the answer to that is categorically no. Would Martin Murray have gone 11 rounds against most heavyweights? You know the answer already to that, don't you? I mean, Golovkin is a great middleweight. But I think £168 is a step too far. This isn't a flyweight stepping up to super flyweight. This is an £8 gap. And this will be putting him in the ring with guys like Gilberto Ramirez, Callum Smith, George Groves, who just have such a vast size difference, you know. For people who think Golovkin would take it in his stride, take a minute to look at the career of Arthur Abraham. You know, Arthur Abraham was a feared middleweight, known as a devastating one-punch knockout artist and an absolute wrecking ball. He moved up to £168. Suddenly, his punches didn't have the same effect. You know, I'm not saying Golovkin would suddenly become a light puncher, but his punches didn't have the same effect, the same power. And he wasn't able to dominate in the same fashion. And for me, Golovkin, if anything, looks more like a £154 fighter than a £168 fighter. What I'm saying here isn't to discredit Golovkin. What I'm saying here isn't to give Golovkin any criticism or stick. But in boxing, we have weight classes for a reason. And Golovkin is a small fighter for £160. He's a small fighter for £160. So I don't think he should necessarily move up to 168. I think that will cause real problems for him and, yeah, may result in some subpar performances compared to what we're used to seeing. Having said that, it's a difficult position because I also don't want to continue to see him fighting the Dominic Wades of this world. You know, you'd like to see him fighting more competitive opposition. So, you know, I'm not 100% sure what the answer is. It's a difficult quandary. You know, there would certainly be more fights out there for him at 168 than 160. I just don't think he'll be the same fighter at 68 pounds. I just, you know, just look at how big Dominic Wade was compared to him, and imagine how small Dominic Wade would be if you stuck him next to a Callum Smith or a George Groves or a Gilberto Ramirez. And, you know, that's what it is. We have weight classes for a reason. But Golovkin goes marching on. You know, very impressive performance from him. Even though, you know, it was against subpar opposition. There's no argument that Golovkin isn't the number one middleweight in the division. For me, he's certainly on my pound-for-pound top 10 list. He's probably around 5 or 6. I think the argument for him being very high on the list is that he has achieved utter dominance of his weight class and beaten lots of people, you know, who are in and around the top 10, top 15 of his weight class. I think the reason I struggle to have him higher than sort of 5 or 6 is because he hasn't beaten any other opposition that could be considered pound-for-pound level. I mean, look at Manny Pacquiao. He's beaten Tim Bradley, for example, who would also make my pound-for-pound top 10 list. Andre Ward clearly has beaten Carl Frost, who was a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter. Sergei Kovalev have beaten Bernard Hopkins, who I think, despite his age, he could make an argument was a pound-for-pound top 10 fighter. And Golovkin, and it's not his fault. I know he's ducked, I know he's avoided, you know, not his fault. But at the end of the day, it's hard to rate someone that highly until they've got the form in the book, regardless if it's their fault or not. But Golovkin's best victories are, you know, a Martin Murray, who's come up short at world title level 3 or 4 times, and a David Lemieux, who is a hard puncher, but fundamentally was, you know, wasn't he stopped by Marco Antonio Rubio? I mean, he's not a pound-for-pound level fighter. That's what I'm getting at. So Golovkin deserves to be in the conversation based on his longevity as a champion and based on his dominance. And it's a tough position to manage him because I find it hard to rate him higher than that until he beats the names. It may be that the names are more at 168 than they are at 160 for him to fight I think Saunders will fight Eubank this year, which will eliminate another 2 names from his next fight. But I just don't see him as a £168 fighter. Look, Golovkin's clearly very good. I'm not saying he'd go up to 168 and start getting knocked out and getting hammered and getting outclassed, but I don't think he'll have the same effect. I think he will be... I could see an Arthur Abraham situation where the size difference is, because he's smaller than Arthur Abraham as well, so I could just see him becoming a different fighter at 168, and let's not forget he's no spring chicken. So if I was him, I'd probably be looking to stay at 160, but it's I'm rambling now, but it is a hard quandary, and we're going to discuss this more. I think when we do the podcast on Wednesday, I'm going to put that out to the panel. What should Golovkin do? Should he move up to 168? Should he stay at 160? What fights would you like to see Golovkin in? So if you've got any ideas on those, do leave them in the comments section below. Which opponents would you like to see Golovkin in against? What do you think regards to weight class? 168, 160, or maybe even 154? Let me know your thoughts, guys. If you've enjoyed this video, hit a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please do subscribe. Many thanks for watching.